respondents who wish to oppose the IEC's bid to appeal the Electoral Court order, which paved the way for former President Jacob Zuma to remain on the uMkhonto Sizwe party's candidate list, have until today to file answering affidavits in the Constitutional Court. Now, this comes after the Apex Court issued directions in the IEC's application just weeks shy of the 2024 polls. Now, independent elections analyst Michael Atkins joins us now. Michael, thank you so much for your time. Of course, we don't want to delve into the legal aspects of this particular matter, but we do, of course, understand that the MK party has issued out a note to the Constitutional Court just asking for more time in which to respond. But I want you to then, just pick your brain in terms of what do we make of these developments? I mean, we are a few weeks, until the elections. Importantly, of course, the IEC has said that it wants this particular matter, in the case of the public interest, to be finalized before we actually get into those elections. Just your thoughts around this matter ahead of the elections.
Yes, thank you. The first consideration is that this does not change the preparations for the election at this stage. It doesn't affect who's on the ballot paper, the printing of the ballot papers, which is now underway. So in that sense, we can rest easy. The logistical preparation for the election goes ahead as normal. But the question raises electoral concerns because without the reasons from the Electoral Court, we don't know what reason, we don't know what reason was given, and we don't yet know whether the court is saying that Mr. Zuma would be entitled to be a member of parliament at the end of the process. Now, if you think of people choosing to vote, thinking perhaps that he may be a member of parliament at the end of the process, but then if it turns out that he's not, then the election is being conducted on the basis of wrong understanding. So the clarity from an electoral point of view is also a very important matter.
Now, Michael, of course, we are going to the polls at the end of the month, next month, but so is, half the world, essentially. There's so many elections, crucial elections happening around the world. We've seen, of course, other countries, electoral commissions also, come under attack, in one way or another. But just talk to us about what we are currently seeing now in terms of just objections around certain things that the IEC has done, court case after court case. What do we make of this and the integrity then of the IEC and, of course, the election itself?
Well, I think we can separate into two areas. We could call it more administrative issues, and there have been some administrative problems. There was a party left off the lists when the candidates were announced on the 26th of March. They addressed their problem without having to go to the court. They were then on the final list. So the administrative issues, yes, those things happen. And by and large, the IEC has dealt with the administrative matters. And then we get into what we might call the more political considerations. And there have, unfortunately, been a number of statements made concerning the IEC, their motives, their actions. And many of these appear to be trying to paint the IEC as in some sense biased, in favor of whom or in what direction is hard to say. But what we do see is that most of those political statements trying to paint the IEC in a bad light do not have clear substantiation. It's political, it's speculative. So when we come to the Electoral Commission, it's essential that when there is any criticism, that there is objective evidence and proper motivation for that criticism.
Let's turn our focus then, if you will allow, to the voter. I mean, this is going to be a very interesting election, and of course a difficult one, or confusing one rather, for the electorate. I mean, how important and crucial is then voter education when it comes to this particular election? We are going to, of course, be seeing, 3 ballot papers because of the independents also coming into the fray. There are a number of political parties that have now also come into the landscape. What should voters be mindful of, and how do they then start to make the right decisions for themselves?
Yes, you're perfectly correct. The question of the ballot papers is important, and the education is particularly important with that. Just very simply, the regional ballot and the national ballot both count towards the election of the 400 members of the National Assembly, where the regional ballot includes parties and independent candidates, and the main national ballot only parties. So people must realize that they can make whatever choice they wish on those 2 ballots, but both count collectively towards the National Assembly. The other very important change for this election is that the law has changed, that it is necessary for voters to vote in the voting station they are registered. Now, in 2019, approximately 10% of the electorate voted in other voting stations using the what's termed the Section 24A applications. If voters wish to do that this time, they have to notify the IEC by the 17th of May if they are going to be in a different voting district. And that is quite essential to avoid difficulties of people arriving on election day expecting to vote and then being turned away.
As we wrap up our conversation, Michael, just perhaps your thoughts around the various surveys that we are seeing ahead of this election. I mean, what do we make of surveys that purport at least to predict, how parties will be performing, or the turnout itself? How do we weigh in, what information to consume at this point?
Look, surveys are interesting, and they do provide some direction and some pointers. But in South Africa, being a very diverse country, we often find that surveys overrepresent certain parties and underrepresent certain parties in their results. When people look at those figures, they must also pay very careful attention to what percentage are undecided. And one must be very careful as to how one allocates those undecided people being surveyed, because there can be a number of different reasons. People are maybe afraid of the culture in the ahead of the election. There's a lot of different reasons for those undecided. So certainly they show us the general indication, but we should not assume that if a particular newcomer party is polling at 1 or 2%, that is actually what they are going to get. It is hard to get reliable information, particularly for regionally based parties or some of the new parties.